Hello, everyone. This is Hong Yao Isaac again. So this week I'm gonna make a new video, and today, as you can see on the title, so I would like to talk about what should the users of interpreter service be aware of. As you can tell, this video is in English. So if you want, you can leave on a comment. I can actually make a video in Cantonese and Mandarin as well. However, for this particular video, I would be using English and would be talking about what would me or any individual interpreters would like every users of our service to be aware of when you are in a situation where you engage an interpreter. So this video will be talking briefly about a few matters or issues that users of interpreters may not be aware of. And if they do, or if they were aware of these small issues, they probably will develop a much better relationship and more effective or efficient use of interpreter service. So let's begin. So first of all, talking about interpreters, the best way to see them is they are just like other professionals. They work for money. Okay, if you ever read this book called Rich Dad and Poor Dad, and Robert Kiyosaki, he once said that the majority of workers or most of us who live in a modern society, we usually sacrifice our time for money. And this is exactly the case for interpreters. So what interpreters do is that they sacrifice their professional knowledge and skill and also their time in exchange for money. So what you need to be aware of is that all interpreter services are booked for a certain amount of time. And unless it is a court interpreting scenario, most of other interpreting cases happen for about maximum 2 or 3 hours. And the usual period of bookings were 90 minutes or 1 hour. So this is particularly common for community interpreting scenarios such as clinics, hospitals, and sometimes police station. But usually police station you would expect an extension. Um, Also, you may expect that for school, public or private school. Sometimes could be even 1 hour only. So no matter where you go, unless it is a full day court service, usually interpreters are booked for a certain amount of time. Therefore, the first thing I would like each and every one of your potential interpreter users to know is that our client should always keep in mind that punctuality is very important. So by saying that, that means you have to start on time. Of course, I understand this wouldn't be possible because you might involve different parties. The doctors may be on their way going to a home visit, and they got into a traffic jam. They got into an accident, a roadblock, and maybe it was the other way around. The user, the non-English speakers, they were from a different suburb, a different town. They might be stuck in the traffic, so they may ended up late, sometime up to an hour. So, however, you need to understand that your bookings is only 90 minutes. So if you don't start on time, usually that basically means that you are doing this in the expense of your time. Interpreters are only paid for a certain amount of time, an hour or 90 minutes. So once it goes beyond this time, it's entirely up to their discretions for them to choose whether they want to stay or not. And sometimes, this is especially true for hospitals, where they would not allow you to extend this service because there is a budget constraint for different public services, such as hospital. Therefore, starting on time is possibly the most important thing for any community interpreting service. And look, to start on time, you need to make sure you had all the time recorded correctly on your calendar or your diary. A lot of doctors or private lawyers that I've been to, sometimes they tell me that, oh, I thought our appointment was an hour later or 15 minutes later, or even if it's like half an hour later, 5 minutes later, it doesn't really matter. Okay? Whatever interpreters do is up to the instruction provided by the agencies. Therefore, interpreter will always arrive at the time that they were told to arrive. Therefore, if it is a 9 o'clock appointment, you have to make sure that you double check once again and again with all the relevant parties. It might be doctors, it might be your non-English speaking clients, that they have to arrive at a certain time. Because once the time began, the clock began to tick. And as I mentioned previously, interpreters may not be allowed to stay behind, or maybe they have another job that is coming right after this, or they have some personal matter. Or basically, as an interpreter, we are free to just go and enjoy a cup of coffee after an hour and a half of interpreting. So they might not be able to stay behind. Therefore, punctuality is rule number one for all interpreting service. You start at 9 o'clock, that means maximum you should start at 9:05. After hello, hi, a bit of introduction, that's it. So punctuality is very important when you use interpreters. And also, you sometimes, if you are a nice person, or you are a plummet, or you provide service as a lawyer, you may be okay to go beyond a little bit of time for sometime even out of a good heart, that you wouldn't even ask for payment for this extra amount of time. However, this is not the case for interpreters, as you could definitely expect. Interpreters, they get paid by the time they spend. So a lot of my clients, especially in some of the home visit scenario, they would automatically expect that, okay, interpreters come while we are wrapping up. There's just a few more points that I need to talk about. It's okay for them to stay behind. It's okay. Sometimes it goes up to 15 minutes, half an hour. This actually is not what we would like to see, or we actually, ethically speaking and legally speaking, we shouldn't allow or accept this. Therefore, there are so many cases where the professionals, such as the doctor, they were not aware of the time. They will basically just go by the schedule. They are seeing multiple clients or multiple patients, and they never expected that the interpreters may have to go exactly on time. Once again, back to my favorite case, Eye and Ear Hospital. So Eye and Ear Hospital in Melbourne. This hospital, it's of course the best eye and ear hospital in the Southern Hemisphere. So clients from all over Melbourne, all over Australia, sometimes overseas, come all the way to Eye and Ear Hospital in Melbourne to receive medical treatments and examinations. So this hospital is very, very, very busy, and the doctors were, they were really professional, and they had to be extremely efficient. So they are seeing one patient after the others. They sometimes may overlook the fact that one or two patients may require interpreting service, and they might go on. They book an interpreter for up to 4 hours or even 8 hours, and then some of the client who may be scheduled for a later part of the day, they might not aware of the fact that interpreters had a certain amount of time that need to adhere to, that they had to go unless they are willing to stay without getting paid, which you should never expect that to happen. Therefore, on a hospital, they usually go on with the schedule, and they might eventually, want to see a patient who speaks only Chinese, only Cantonese, only Mandarin, barely a word in English, and unfortunately, they overlook the time constraint. They forget to put this client's file on the top of the queue. So they had no choice other than paying for the interpreter who come on site, sitting there for 2 3 hours doing nothing, and again pay for telephone interpreting service. So this is an important thing for all users. From our perspective, is that you should always respect the time and be aware that we are only booked for an hour, 2 hour, an hour and a half. And you should never ever assume that if you need a couple extra minutes, interpreters should automatically stay behind. This is not the case, to be honest. And so when you're dealing with interpreters, right, you're gonna, go in a certain pace. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to speak really fast. It means that you need to be aware of your time, because if you go really fast, like some of my clients do, it might backfire. The doctors realized that he only had 5 minutes left to explain a, eye procedure, such as a cataract removal procedure. And then he goes really, really fast, and he forgot that sometimes some of the jargon could be difficult. Some of the sentences could be really long, and interpreters, we are human beings as well, so our capacity is not unlimited. Therefore, when doctors goes too fast, then we need to ask him or her to repeat again. Then by repeating over and over again, that only slows down the entire process. So that actually backfires. And so time constraint is there. Is basically a factors that you just can't run away from. It doesn't. If you think by speaking faster will make it up for you, you are definitely wrong. Because when you use an interpreter, you need to ensure that you don't go too fast. You don't speak in a way that you use very weird jargons, or speak in a way that is difficult to comprehend, because you don't want to confuse the interpreters, and ultimately you are confusing your clients or the doctors. So interpreters, they might look like they know everything, but the misconception that a lot of my clients are having is that interpreters, they are just like a live dictionary. This is not the case. Interpreters knows the skill to retain what you say. They have short-term memory. They had note-taking skill. They know the procedure of how to internally transfer language and utterance in their mind. However, they are not dictionaries. So when you are doing something very, uh, technicals or full of jargons, you should expect the fact that interpreter might just pull out their cell phone, pull out their iPhone, and go on Google Translate and try to look for the exact jargon, exact definition. Not that they are not professional, but to be honest, this is exactly the opposite, because interpreters will always try to avoid making important, significant mistakes or mistranslation or misinterpreting, so that there wouldn't be any trouble further down the track. So words such as different body organs or procedures, or especially medications, where it may not be seen commonly as Panadol, which is very easy to interpret. Some of the Lyrica, those could be easy. Penicillin, those could be easy. However, there are some other medications that are not very common. So it is entirely okay for the interpreter to try to make sure that he or she gets the right words. So they might need to use a Google Translate or a translation app on the cell phone. So also, beside being the fact that they are not dictionary, But like a dictionary, interpreters are neutral. At least they are supposedly professionally trained to be a neutral party. Therefore, um, if you speak to them, right, they are. You should assume that they are afresh. You might use their service before. Maybe they are the exact same client. However, you should never expect that. Oh, as well, for example, I've told you last week I said that. So you can just tell the client is exactly the same thing. No, that's not the case. You just have to repeat yourself. Assume that this interpreter is came for the first time like a machine. You wouldn't just assume that your laptop recognize your face every time. So when you are in front of your computer monitor, you just say it's the same password. No, it's not the case. You just have to repeat yourself again, and then maybe it's up to your non-English speaking client to get what exactly you're talking about. So it is not interpreter's jobs to remember what he or she said a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and you assume that he or she should explain everything that you wanted your client to know. Also, if you don't understand what the interpreters were saying, there may be two reasons for it. Number one is from the interpreters. The interpreters may speak in a way that you might not be able to understand it clearly, or he or she is using a jargon or a way of talking that confuses you. However, from my personal experience and from what I heard from my colleagues, these are usually happen because your non-English speaking clients, because the interpreters, their job is to interpret as closely as possible what your client tells you. So your client sometimes can go a little bit confusing, can go around the circle, they might not be answering your questions. This is very common in telephone interpreting, such as when a utility company such as for water, gas, or electricity service or internet service, the my client, the English client, may say that, okay, when are you moving in? I think I mentioned that before. And then the Chinese or Mandarin client, they might just say, oh my, I'm going to come back from China on whichever day, and then I will be staying in my cousin's home for a few days, and then eventually A, B, C, D, E, and I will come back to move into this property address by 2nd of May, 2nd of June. So do not take it as the fact that interpreters maybe, if you think your client had answered and the interpreter interpreted something that you didn't expect to hear. A lot of my clients may say, excuse me, interpreter, my question was yada 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 yada. So you automatically may think that interpreters did not interpret your question clearly. However, sometimes you might have to understand that it was the answer, the person who answers you, that the interpreter has to be adhered to, and faithfully interpret the nonsense that you heard. So if there's any confusion, if there's anything that you think it sounds a bit weird from your question, always ask them to repeat or consult with the interpreter. Did you ask this question? And if the interpreter say yes, and you will say, okay, now it's time for you to be specific. You will say, madam, sir, can you please tell me what exactly was the date that you move into such a place? So it's up to you to be more specific if you want to get the answer you want. And look, the important factor you need to know is that interpreters, right? They only interpret. They are not your. They are like your mouthpiece or your client's mouthpiece. So they can only go by what they heard. So if you want to make your life easy, you want to make everyone's life easy, you have to try to put yourself in the interpreter's shoes and try to make the interpreter's lives easy. Because eventually, The last thing you want to see is a communication breakdown. If you keep on going really fast, if you keep using difficult jargons, if you do not answer the questions for as long as you want, it only drags on. The interpreter will just interpret exactly what you say, and it wouldn't help you. Therefore, if you put yourself into the interpreter's shoes, you understand. You try to keep things brief, brief in the way that you use shorter sentences. However, you are entirely entitled to say as much as you want, as detailed as you want, but make sure you speak in rather layman's term, in 1 or 2 or maximum 3 sentences at a time, and also make sure that you don't put your emotion towards the interpreters. You are actually still speaking to your client through an interpreter. It's just like whenever you're talking on Skype with your friend, and if your friends were making you upset, you don't smash your laptop. You actually go against your friend. So in a way, that's how you should see it. And unfortunately, a lot of clients, they may not understand, may not realize this, and sometimes they complain about the interpreters. And unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing that we can do about it. Also, now interpreter, they should always interpret to the best of their abilities everything you say. So if there's something that you don't want your client to know, if there's something that you don't want your client to hear, don't say it. At least don't let the interpreter hear it. Okay? There are many cases. This is a very common one. Palliative care or oncology clinic, where a client who doesn't speak English, he or she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, breast cancer, kidney cancer, whichever cancer that is, and the doctors and the daughters of the client, they might say that, oh, this may be too much for him to take in, and it might scare him. However, the daughter and the doctor, they did not communicate with each other beforehand that the doctor should speak in a nicer, euphemistic way to make the client feel better. So the doctor spoke in a blunt, straight manner that you had a stomach cancer, stage 4, and you only have 3 months left from our, perspective. So the daughter looks really upset, and she just kept looking at me and doing this to me and say that, oh, can you please just, don't tell him to scare him. However, we, as the interpreter, had no choice. If the clients and the doctors, they are sitting face to face, we just have to interpret everything we heard. Therefore, if there's something that you don't want your client to hear, then you need to make sure that either speak to the interpreters and other parties involved to get the consensus, to let them know that there are something that we might not want you to tell them. However, the most correct way to do it is don't say it at all when you are in front of your clients. So whatever you say, as long as the interpreter hears it, he or she will have to interpret. However, of course, you can always say that, excuse me, sorry, scrap that. Let's start again. That could happen. This could happen in the police situation where the policeman was trying to, find the correct word to ask a question, and then maybe the policeman would say, "Where were you last night?" And then the officer was, "Oh, excuse me, scrap that. Look, let me ask it this way: on such and such a day, where were you by this and this time?" So you can definitely do that, but always make sure you understand that interpreter, they are like a mouthpiece. Whatever you say, supposedly they should interpret. So never ever expect an interpreter to filter what you say, to tune what he or she said to your favorite, to your taste. That's absolutely impossible. And talking about this cancer patient, now I would like to talk about a common mistake that a lot of doctors, lawyers, or other professionals, they might make. This mistake are this mistake is regarding to family members. Okay, so a lot of family members of elderly clients or parents of children, for example, they actually had quite a certain level of command of English. So they spoke some English, they understand some English. They might not understood it perfectly, but they had an idea of what you were saying. Sorry. So, however, you need to remember that family members or anyone who speaks English, they are not interpreters. Okay, I repeat, family members or anyone who speaks 2 or 3 languages are multilingual. They are not interpreters. Family members, they do not have the training to process the lexical and cultural differences between the 2 languages. And if they assume the role of interpreters, they got into the risk of omissions, misunderstanding, thus misinterpretation, and also in the for give you the example of that cancer incident, they might filter out important information that the doctors or the professional wants the client to know. So if you rely on family members, you're putting yourself in the risk of miscommunications. Of course, it's entirely up to you, but if you had already spent the money and the resource to engage an interpreter, you probably should use this opportunities, use this resource to its full extent. So relying on family members is sometimes could be disastrous. I once went to a administrative appeal tribunal case where someone was appealing for a visa refusal, and then the client, she was from China. She wanted to have a visa to stay in Australia, and she said something that I interpreted. However, the family member who was sitting behind her thinks that, oh, this is not the right way to interpret it, and she interrupts immediately and abruptly, and then she explained herself in a broken English, in a way that it really doesn't tell the story. So eventually, the member of the administrative appeal tribunal had to ask the client, the direct visa applicant, to speak again, to rephrase herself or talk again about what she or he just said. However, it's just simply not helpful. It creates further confusions, and it may seems like you're interfering the whole procedure. So if you had an interpreter, and you might think that this interpreter was not up to the task, first of all, it is your subjective opinion. Secondly, interpreters, they are considered a staff of the hospital, staff of the court. So just as you wouldn't, interrupt and cut off a lawyer or a judge when he or she speaks, it's probably not a good idea for you to interrupt an interpreter. So if you have any issue, you can always report or speak to someone or speak to your lawyer or speak to the court clerk. If any interpreter is making constant mistake, constant misinterpretation, constant omissions, yeah, okay, of course you're entitled to report to relevant authority. However, if you had 1 or 2 words that you think it could be interpreted differently, it is most appropriately for you to leave it to the rest of the court, the rest of the tribunal. Leave it to the doctors to sort it out themselves. If they have confusion, if your family or your answers does not match up to their expectations, they will ask you again. So do not worry about this. Also, interpreters, they are supposedly should be a mouthpiece, right? They should be neutral. So for interpreters, they shouldn't be picking which side they are with. There's no emotion involved whatsoever. Therefore, interpreters, you should never expect an interpreter who speaks either your language or English to pick sides. There are so many occasions throughout my career as an interpreter where my client will say that, "Excuse me, could you just explain this for me? You were from China before. You lived in China before. You know what I mean. You know what it means. You know that but that wasn't what I meant. Excuse me." Unfortunately, the interpreter doesn't know what you mean. That's exactly what happened, is that the interpreter shouldn't assume anything at all. He or she only interpret whatever he or she hears. So if you want to explain yourself, you need to do it yourself. You are the only one who's responsible for this. And then, on the other hand, if you are a English speaker, you're from Australia or Britain, and you are speaking to a non-English speaker, and when you try to say something or explain something, maybe if just on the sidetrack or a small matter, the interpreter might help you to rephrase it. However, you should never expect that to happen automatically. You should always make sure you are clear yourself, so the interpreter will understand fully what you trying to express, and they will interpret exactly what you want. So interpreters are not there to fix what you said, not there to make sure that you're grammatically correct. They are not there to assume or try to find out what exactly you meant and try to give out the answer that you want. So interpreter only hear what you say, and says exactly what and interpret exactly what you just said. So you have to be very careful not to mix the not to assume that an interpreter should just get what you want, get what you meant, okay? And also, you my interpreters, they shouldn't you know, be interrupted too frequently. Think about this when you're talking to someone, even in your own language, okay, to an important person. Maybe you are at court, maybe you are with a police officer, and then you try to express yourself, and all of a sudden a sound, a alarm knocked out, or you hear a big bang, and it breaks your thought. Your train of thought was broken. So this is very, very disastrous for an interpreter. So when an interpreters interpret, especially if you said 2 or 3 or 5 sentences previously, and the interpreter was interpreting, and you all of a sudden butt in and try to cut off, then you basically are breaking the train of thought of the interpreter. So maybe the interpreter may all of a sudden just forgot everything you just said because his or her train of mind was broken. So you might just have to restart from the beginning again. So be very careful. If you're talking to an interpreter, you want to express yourself, make sure you think about what you said first. And if there's something missing, you can always go back to it and tell the interpreter later. Do not butt in and try to cut off the train of thought, because that will only break down the communication. Also, you have to understand that interpreters, right? They are they don't they had to always improve themselves. You are more than welcome to provide feedback. For example, sometimes before I leave such as a clinic case, if you are using this interpreter service for quite a while or 1 or 2 times, and you think that, oh, this interpreter is doing a great job, he or she understood you, and he or she convey the messages from the clients very clearly. you know no, don't keep it to yourself. Feel free to tell the interpreters that you are doing a good job. We like you. You are doing so well that we want you to come back. Thank you very much. Say the small things. These things actually help to encourage the interpreter to work better, to try harder, and try to really align himself or herself with your interest. So Interpreters are human beings as well, although they're meant to be neutral like a machine. However, they are not. They are all human beings as well. Therefore, when you're using interpreters, right, try to respect the professionalism. And if you have any comments or you have some feedback, try to do it constructively, politely, and never hesitate to tell them what you think at the end of the task, so they can always improve or be encouraged to keep up the good job. So when using interpreters, then you should be, you're more than welcome to provide them with feedback. So that is something that some of the professionals and some client they might sound hesitated. They might say, "Oh, excuse me, sir. I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but I would like to tell you that next time you should do this, or I would like to thank you for your great performance today." Look, that's absolutely fine. Providing direct feedback to interpreters, these are welcomed. And of course, you can always provide your feedback to their agencies. So you can always call back. And then some of the electronic sign-off sheets, there's a place where you can just type in your comment. You are more than welcome to do that. So this not only help the interpreters to polish their skills and let them know how to do better next time. Sometimes it helps the agencies to work more efficiently. Therefore, you can always provide them with feedback. So yeah, so this whole process is could be improved constantly. And of course, back to what I mentioned previously, when you are using an interpreter, always be mindful of time, because if you want to have a constructive communication time, you try to be effective and efficient, you need to make sure that the interpreters, they are not in a rush. If you waited for too long, if you miscalculated your time and the interpreter had to go, especially in a hospital scenario where they wouldn't be paid for extra time without lengthy procedure of prior approval, then you need to be aware of it. There were some, again, back to my, my experience from the past, which I mentioned the past few videos. The doctor who chased after me with the client, I was walking out the clinic. She was following me, keep talking, keep asking me to interpret, and hoping that I can tell the client exactly what she wants and everything. However, that's simply not constructive, simply not professional, and no one should ever do that. Yeah, so I think that's basically for now. Also, oh, by the way, there's one small thing from an interpreter's perspective. If you are um, having interpreters coming for your service, and all of a sudden you don't feel well, your client may cancel the bookings, or there's some change of schedules, try to inform the agency as soon as possible, because it saves you money. For some agency, if you report this for too short of notice, you have to pay for the full service. Secondly, it really helps the interpreters to arrange their own schedules and diaries. So if you are not, if of course there's always emergencies. However, if a booking was cancelled or if your clients couldn't make it, please do not wait until the very last minute, as what they did to me 2 weeks ago. Just when I was just walking on my way, about a block away from the location where I was supposed to be going, I received a phone call saying that, well, unfortunately, today the client couldn't make it, so your service is no longer required. Yes, I got paid. However, it messed up my schedule. I could have go to a full-day court job, but I couldn't because of that particular job. So yeah, I thought I should put that in this video. So if you ever use a interpreter for his or her service, and if you change your mind, please let the agency or the person know as soon as possible. And be aware that if you provide too short of notice, you have to still partially or even fully pay for the the service. So I hope you like this video. Press like, or let me know in the comment if you want me to talk about anything in particular in my future videos. And I take care of yourself. Take care. Be safe. It's still coronavirus is still there in Australia, so I hope you all well. Wish you all the best for you and your family. Thank you.